Okay, to continue with our discussion proper, right now we will be talking about um, the ethics and moral consideration in forensic evaluation. So, the major topic here in this part of our discussion is, can we as experts inform our client, the defendant or the perpetrator, about the overall nature of evaluation? Meaning, as the expert, we have to respect the right of the client to full disclosure about the nature, the scope, and limitations of the overall evaluation. And aside from that, it must be communicated on the level of the client that he or she can understand. And aside from respecting the client to full disclosure, it is also our ethical practice to give information about the nature of our services, as well as if there is a mandate to provide the results and other information to appropriate people. All of this, of course, in the context of our professional practice. So, part of our professional practice is to inform the client about the limits of confidentiality, and we know about that since many semesters ago. In addition, as an expert, you also have to check and you also have to know if there is prior mandate from the legal counsel to not disclose any information to the client or significant others. So meaning, you have to be prepared, you have to know all the needed information, especially, again, if there is an agreement, if there is a mandate not to disclose fully to the client and the significant others. Now, there is a major question or concern here. And that is, how can you say to the client, to the perpetrator or the defendant, that all of these processes are mandated in order to determine if he or she is genuine in his self or in her self-presentation? This means that how can you communicate without making your client, the defendant or the perpetrator, that he is evaluated, because he or she might have potential to deceive. Meaning, how can you say that to your client that, okay, you're not lying or you are lying? So the recommendation is not to deliver that statement in the same with my example, but to say to your client, make him or her understand that all of these forensic evaluation process are conducted in order to assist the client, assist the defendant or the perpetrator in order to determine his or her fitness to stand trial, or in order to determine his or her competency to proceed with the legal proceedings. Okay, so there is also another major question or concern here. As the expert or as the forensic evaluator, your job is to conduct a series of psychological tests, personality tests, and then neuropsychological tests, and all of those. So, what if there's a mandate in giving the client full disclosure? However, the manual don't have the instruction to inform the test takers or the client about full disclosure. So, what side are we going to follow? So the recommendation is, even if there's a mandate in full disclosure about the overall nature of the evaluation, the recommendation is always follow the instruction of the test manual, because there are test manual that the instructions are general. So we have to follow verbatim in order not to negatively affect or simply not to influence the test results of our series or battery of tests. Okay, so when it comes to the overall guideline for consideration of ethics and moral issues, especially we have different contexts. Each country, each culture has different contexts. As a practitioner, we as evaluators, as experts in the future, we must be sensitive of the moral issues, especially the current ones. So in our context, we have this emerging topic about the LGBT community. So we have also must equip ourselves in what are the current issues in that area of community, in that special population. Next is forensic psychology is not really common in our context here in the Philippines. That's why we have to consult other experts, other colleagues, in order to have more reliable data or database of information about the issues. Third, we must also adopt consistent procedures, because here in my report later, it will be discussed that our sources of information must come from many different references or sources. This is because there is no one stand-alone procedure in forensic evaluation. And that connects to number 4. We must consistently update our knowledge as well as our skills in order to address ethical issues. So as I have reported earlier about the misconception, it was reported that the skills in deception detection can be learned through proper training and proper workshops. Before diving into the proper methods and application, we have to ask ourselves also, number 1, are you trained in FDA? Do you have the skills? So what is FDA again? FDA is the guidelines that stands for forensic distortion analysis. So it is a handbook, it's a guideline, and for me, I don't have it. I can't find it even in Google. Do you have the skills in deception detection? Actually, it was reported that we are not equipped in this kind of skills because it's not every day there is training about deception detection, and also it is not every day that we come out in our office or in our houses that we have this mindset that, oh, this guy is lying, his emotions are not real, he's concealing something. We are not like that. So this is one of the question. Number 2, are we up to date with the current ethical issues? Another thing to consider is, was there an intentional distortion in the evaluation? So what is an intentional distortion again? These are those non-deliberate distortion due to other factors such as stress, such as fatigue, such as other mental conditions. So for example, what if the self-report of the perpetrator or the defendant says that during the commission of the crime, he experienced psychotic episodes. So that is an intentional distortion. But the next question is, how can you measure that? Right? So meaning, you have to also be knowledgeable in DSM or ICD. Specifically in my example, you have to be knowledgeable in what are the signs and symptoms if you are having psychotic episodes or psychosis or schizophrenia and other comorbidities. Also, the fourth thing to consider is, was there a deliberate deception? Was there really an intentional deception or faking that happened? And if there is, how can you measure that? Is there a standardized method or process that can measure deliberate deception? So that's another question, no? And fifth, if there is faking, how can we measure that quantitatively and qualitatively? So clearly, there are many things to consider in forensic evaluations. Let's go now to the things to consider. We have 5. First is the issues about hysteria and malingering. Does it have cerebral functioning? Because although we have battery of tests that measures faking, that measures inconsistencies, that measures randomness, it must be correlated to actual cerebral impairment. And secondly, it is also recommended, again, to have multiple measures of distortion. It is because, for example, no, in number 1, that can be answered by battery of tests, including neuropsychological tests. It must also be in tandem with historical records of the client or the perpetrator or defendant. Meaning, as the expert, we must also consider history of criminal records of the person. The fourth thing to consider is, in our reality, there are attorneys that are teaching, coaching their client about the things that must be done or the things that must not be done in court, meaning the do's and don'ts. So even if the person is coached by his or her attorney, there are many tests that can address faking, because clearly that is intentional deception. So what are those tests? Example are intelligence test and ability test, because we cannot do better with our intelligence and ability. So later it will be discussed also. And of course, lastly, the cost of administering the procedure, because there's an analogy here. The cost of hiring the wrong person is not that risky compared to hiring an astronaut for going to space. So as an expert, you have to consider the risk of your forensic evaluation. Right now, we are on our 5th topic about the methods and application. So here we have non-verbal behavior. So as a reminder from the authors, non-verbal behaviors are those that include body language, your tone of voice, your facial expression, and including the emotions that you are trying to portray to other people, as well as the emotions that you are hiding. So same as the video clip that I showed you earlier, non-verbal behaviors are not really predictors of deception, because according to Dr. Paul Ekman, behavior clues to deceit should only serve to alert you as the forensic expert that you need to do more investigation and in order to get more relevant information.